Let's get into that when it comes to the inflation target and tariffs and how to balance the two. Is a 2% inflation target doable with the higher tariffs that President-elect Donald Trump was promising on the campaign trail?
Well, good morning. Well, 2% is the Fed's inflation objective, and ever since they were, raising rates, and when they, put the funds rate at 5.3%, they said they needed confidence to get inflation back down to 2%. We've seen improvements in inflation, and there's been a lot of optimism, but most recently, the CPI-PCE data has been a little bit bumpy. And I think since Jackson Hole, when Powell said that it was time to cut rates, and the Fed has cut rates 75 basis points, things have probably been bumpier on inflation than they were expecting. So I think they're going to be cautious. And then in this new environment, with the prospect of tariffs, that's like, that would increase prices one-off, not necessarily inflationary over the longer period of time, but a rise in the prices around where imported goods and things like that, and that would create a problem for the Fed. I think a challenge in terms of interpreting the inflation data. That's what I mean.
It's a conversation, though, that at least publicly, Charles, that the Fed is not having. Kashkari yesterday saying it depends what things actually look like. Powell during the presser saying we don't guess, we don't speculate, and we don't assume. You've been in the room where conversations have happened. What do you think is likely the conversation around politics and the type of environment that they will be facing?
I think Powell described it really well during the press conference. He said, when you've got new fiscal policies that have been floated, the Fed is going to be paying attention to what's put into the law, what's actually enacted before that. They're paying attention to what possibilities are. They're, gaming out what some alternative simulations are and what policy responses likely need to be, but you really need those details. I actually thought back in early 2021 that the Biden policies weren't quite as inflationary based upon early things that we'd seen, and then as you actually got them into play, they were more stimulative than I thought, and others too. So you really need to see the details in the implementation, and so that's what they're waiting for, and that's what you'll hear a lot of talk about that until you actually see proposals put on the table and moving forward.
Charles, good morning. You were there for the first Trump administration. You lived through those tariffs and the conversations that you had around the table. Here is a Fed that's dealing with unemployment of 4.1%, inflation theoretically coming back towards target. Should there be a case to build pause into the narrative, or does the Fed continue on its trajectory until we see the detail on these tariffs?
Well, I mean, they are going to need to see details on the tariffs. It is the case that the economy is really quite strong. I mean, as you mentioned, unemployment's 4.1%. Employment growth on average has been pretty good. The last month it was a little bit weaker, but NIPA revisions to GDP, that looks good. So you put that in this environment, and I think the Fed is already. They're recalibrating, but they're not quite sure, how much restrictiveness they need. Maybe they need a little more than they thought back in the Jackson Hole days. Now you bring tariffs into play, and you begin to wonder, in that environment, businesses were able to raise prices, back into, it's just been hard for businesses over a long period of time to raise prices unless there was identifiable reason. And so tariffs give them an identifiable reason. That could be something that sort of changes price-setting behavior in a way that makes it more complicated in terms of assessing what inflationary pressures are going to be. So they're going to need to see some things.
So, Charles, 60 seconds left. Does that mean potentially no cuts in 2025?
No, I think that they're really still quite restrictive. I think that they don't want to get ahead of themselves. Probably they're going to be cautious, and so Powell said at the press conference they're going to go into December and they're going to be asking themselves, "We've done 75. Is that where we need to be?" I think December. I think they'll follow through on this, but I think that they'll adjust the pace in 2025 and be ready to. Move it in either direction, depending on if the economy is weakening. They could ease more, but if inflation is holding up and it's really more of a concern, they'll probably be even more cautious in reducing rates. But they'll reduce rates in 2025. How much? That's a good question.
Charles, thanks so much for your time.